talk about the descent into hell and the correlation with the knowledge of good and evil. The sphere is the most elegant shape known to consciousness in that it takes the least amount of energy to move the sphere in any direction than any other shape available. If we wanted our cars to be able to seamlessly and easily move sideways as well as forward and backwards, our wheels would be spheres, because there is no more efficient shape in terms of conserving energy. Now, the descent into hell is the dividing of the sphere in the language of good and evil. Consciousness is a phenomena of language. Consciousness is a phenomena of language, and so what we experience through language is parts of the sphere through the delineation and distinction of language, parts of the sphere through the delineation and distinction of language that draws attention to certain parts of the whole in certain ways. And as we use words, as we use language, we become aware of that part, whether or not we understand and see its relationship with the whole. And what we are conscious of is the thought elucidated or brought into attention through the tension of the vibration of a word that says that this word means this and this word means this, and that we train our consciousness to look at the sphere, correlating with these verbal noises. Now, the movement towards the Platonic values of beauty and truth and goodness is the movement towards integration. The movement towards integration is the movement towards the sphere, towards the whole. The movement of healing is the return to wholeness. A cult or culture takes the whole and slices it in half. But more often, in the delineation of this is culture and this is not culture, this is okay and this is not okay, more often it's closer to 20%. That a relatively robust culture would take 20% of reality and say, this is who we are, and take 80% or more of reality and say, this is who we are not. This is good. If you attune to this, you belong. This is not good. This is good. This is not good. This is talked about. This is not talked about. This is valued. This is not valued. This is rewarded. This is not rewarded. We create a matrix of distinction. Now, the direction towards beauty, truth, and goodness correlates with wholeness and symmetry. Beauty, truth, and goodness are in some ways different octaves of the same energy. Truth is a direction of data integration. So if you say, I have $1, it's true. If you say, I have $2, it's more true. If you say, I have $3, it's even more true. If you say, I have $1,000, it's several times more true, because it's moving closer to integrating all of the data points. Now, symmetry correlates with beauty. We know this in faces. The most attractive faces have symmetry up and down the right side, according to the semi-conscious biases of human beings that seek symmetry, that seek balance, that seek wholeness. When we move towards truth, we integrate and incorporate more data. When we move towards beauty, we are moving towards symmetry, which incorporates more truth, more data. You leave out half of the photograph and take a half face. Invariably, it does not seem as beautiful because there's less data. There's half of a picture. It's not as satisfying to hear half of a song as it is to hear the whole song. Now, Jordan Peterson talks about something that I woke up reflecting on, which is that if you really want to hurt someone, don't criticize their greed, or which they may have, or punish them for lying, which they may do, or to criticize them for not being intelligent in some area, which they could learn some more in this given field. Don't criticize something bad or attack something bad. If you really want to hurt someone, what you want to do is go for the stem cell in that person that's growing towards what is most beautiful, what is most true. And you want to attack that. You want to take what is most good and wholesome about an individual, and you want to turn that into a perceived enemy. This is the way that you attack someone at a deep level. And this is the theme of this exploration of how is it that we deteriorate a culture, or deteriorate a family, or deteriorate a relationship with ourselves, with others, or the world, in which we attack that which is most healthy, most beautiful, most true in the other, in the relationship, in order to tolerate, to invoke that which is most unhealthy. Well, one of the things to look at in terms of this wholeness and integration paradigm is the phenomena of the smaller body and the larger body. For example, in the larger body of consciousness, in the larger body of all that is, we as human egos, the sense of self that says this is me versus not me, which is in itself a partition. You could say that the human ego is, in a sense, a dis-ease, a source of pain, because pain is the separation from and longing for. And at some level, health is about partnering. Health is about wholeness. And so if you take an individual cell out of the body and just suspend it somewhere in a test tube, etc., it will eventually lose its pattern. It will disintegrate and lose its pattern. Now, in the disintegration and loss of pattern, you have a death of sorts. Not a death of energy. Energy goes back to, to where it was. But you have a death of energy. And the Aborigines understood that the most effective way to kill a tribal member was to isolate them, to have a meeting if someone transgressed the boundary, if they went beyond the pale. Pale is the stone wall in Ireland that was created to delineate between the organized, structured culture and the heathen culture. If you went beyond the pale provided by the cult, then we're not going to welcome you in the cult. You will not belong. And how do we do that? We will not respond to you. We will not talk to you. We will pretend as if you did not exist. And eventually, given that message from a majority of those around you, eventually you will die. When you take a cell out of the body, it disintegrates and loses its pattern. So, in our cult, in our culture, we have our little 20% of what is socially acceptable. And then we have the vast unknown. We have the vastness of other cultures, the vastness of time, past, present, and future, in which more than 10,000 cultures on the planet, 10,000 languages, according to anthropologists, have each existed and found some way to relate to beauty, truth, and goodness, some way to relate to the whole, using some mythology, some language, to create a place for themselves in relationship with the larger body. Because if the whole is all that is, the ego, or the self, is a small piece of all that is. A small piece that relates to all this is with distinction, with a sense that this is me and this is not me. The more that we relate to this is me and this is not me, the more isolated we feel. Because if that's not me, and that's not me, and that's not me, and that's got nothing to do with me, and that's got nothing to do with me, etc., we're dissociating. We're disowning our relationship. And in a framework that is not whole, in a framework that is divided, you have pain. You have the separation from and the longing for wholeness, beauty, truth, goodness. Beauty, truth, and goodness as we define it, as we continue to evolve in our definition, as we continue to create new deities. These are beneath the human drives to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, to develop self-esteem, to develop our gifts, to share those gifts in community, to transcend the personal identity so that we can move towards, return to a sense of beauty, truth, and goodness, a sense of wholeness, that we can, as a separate ego, return to the whole again and know it as ourself for the first time. You know, that the human ego in some ways' job is to leave the whole and say, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me, and find some sense, this is me. But then to return to the whole and learn more and more and more. This is me, this is me, this is me, this is all me. And come back to that place. with an ownership, with a conscious awareness, to, in a sense, start in the feminine place of the wave pattern, of the sphere, of the one. The sphere is the one. But the sphere is also an infinite number of lines. And if the feminine is the one, is the sphere, is the wave pattern, the masculine is the many, is the refraction, is the infinite number of lines on the infinite number of dimensions that make up the one. If the feminine is the sphere, the masculine is all of the different parts that make up the sphere. And these are just two of many distinctions and many dimensions that go into play in the creation of consciousness. Consciousness, this synergy between language and the spaces in between the language, between the dots and the dots and the dots of the words and the energy and the resonance that fills the words. Within our culture, we elevate certain traits and we diminish other traits. And the soul, the spirit, the field, the probability field, continues to give us energy that propels us towards wholeness, which we encounter as challenges, as obstacles, because what they challenge is the boundary between good and evil, the boundary between masculine and feminine, the boundary of our cult and everything else. So as this energy comes that challenges the waves that hit and buffet the concrete wall, the bulkhead, this energy is given to dissolve the boundary, to fill in the void, to provide a healing path to wholeness, a path to grace. Grace is, by its definition, spherical, because grace and its synonym elegance, the efficiency of transforming energy into motion, into intention, directing thought and having it become realized. It is grace when that occurs easily, and it is the sphere that brings us back to grace. Now, in our cult, feelings, particularly of men, sublimated. Sports, brawn, activity, speed, noise, elevated. Sensitivity, sublimated. Toughness, elevated. Focus on the inner world, sublimated. Focus on material things, elevated. Focus on joy and presence, sublimated. Focused on making things happen and struggle, elevated. Focus on the meandering path, sublimated. Focus on getting to the point, elevated. And so in our divide, in our cult divide of so many things, in which healing, in which wholeness, in which even the language of beauty, truth, and goodness is pushed down. So that other focuses, being cool, the cold end of the empathic, sociopathic spectrum, being cool. It doesn't bother me. I don't care. I'm cool. I'm good. No, we don't need to engage. I don't need anyone. Being cool, elevated. Being warm, sublimated. In this environment, that which is most healing, that which is most whole, that which is most beautiful, truth, and good, moving in this direction of extending beyond the cult, is the call of our soul, the call of the whole, pulling us into the taboo terrain, unsanctioned and uncharted by our cult, guarded by the cultural warriors. Those who go beyond this pale will be excluded, will be dissociated, will lose their pattern recognition from the whole of the cult. And so, in a classic divide between the material and the spiritual, in the classic divide of the material and the spiritual created by the cult, we have those people who will follow the cult tradition, who will compete and perform to do well in those arenas sanctioned by the cult, who will be rewarded with survival, with security, with love and belonging, with self-esteem, with opportunities to develop one's gifts and opportunities to share them with the cult. Currently, anything that will make you or a lot of other people money, whatever that is, will be elevated to great heights. Things that create a lot of innocence, a lot of kindness, a lot of beauty. Not so much, unless the beauty is carefully choreographed within the cult framework. And so, what many of us feel in this moment of integration, of moving towards our own wholeness as we approach the barrier of the cult, the barrier that divides things into two, the barriers that say men are strong and hard and rigid. But there's also the part in the man that is incredibly vulnerable and incredibly tender. But that bit doesn't get owned. Therefore, it doesn't get honored. Therefore, it doesn't get respected. Therefore, it is violated when it is expressed. Because when you dishonor, disown, and disrespect, refuse to see and respond to what's there, when you go beyond the boundary, you enter this terrain that is unknown. And it is the unknown aspect of this terrain intersecting with the traumatic nature, intersecting with the traumatic nature of our environment, an environment that threatens, due to the absence of egoic technology, that threatens our survival, our security, our love and belonging. When we do not know about earthquakes enough to prepare and hold space for them, to anticipate them, we are traumatized by them. When we do not know about psychological wounds and do not respond to those psychological wounds, and they become infectious, as in, for example, acts of terror, we become shocked, regressed into the reptilian brainstem, into fight, flight, and freeze, to survive an environment that has energy patterns we do not understand. And it is this nature, it is this dynamic of energy patterns that we don't understand. That is the nature of trauma. It is the nature of trauma when energies that are bigger than the self that we identify with intersect in violation with an identity that is perhaps poorly construed or is not honored by those around us. Then we have this phenomena of violation and trauma, which we will do anything to avoid, which usually means going back into the known territory where it doesn't happen. If you stay in a very small radius within your known environment, you know everything in that radius. If you get on a plane and go to somewhere halfway around the world, you may not know which snakes are poisonous, which are not, etc., etc. And so part of the cult's job is to keep its members into known terrain, that they can anticipate and avoid trauma, such that they can grow. And part of its way of doing that is by violating, dishonoring, disrespecting everyone who goes outside the cult's bound. The cult is constantly changing its boundaries. What's legal this day isn't legal 10 years later, isn't legal 10 years later. It's a constant shift. But whatever is defined as legal in a culture of law, for example, is within the cult's bounds, within the cult's boundaries. So we have this dynamic, and it creates a crisis for the individual. It creates a spiritual crisis, because in order to honor who we are, we have to go out beyond the 20% acceptable boundary provided by our cult. But in the transitioning out into who we are, in the moving through the cult barrier, that glass ceiling, how to do it in such a way, that that which is most good, true, and beautiful in ourselves is not attacked by the cult because it transgresses the law, because it transgresses the pale, because it violates the boundary and results in a dissociation, in an exclusion, in the toxicity or dis-ease of isolation, leading to pattern deterioration. Because loneliness, isolation, the feeling that we do not belong, that we are not understood, that we are not seen, that we are not welcome, that we are alone, creates a matrix within the psyche and the body that destroys our health, our wholeness, our healing, that destroys our mental, emotional, and physical health rapidly, to such a point where our energy pattern disappears, where we, to a certain extent, bow to the majority and allow ourselves to no longer exist, so as to accommodate the status quo, so as to make others more comfortable sticking into known terrain.